I want to welcome everybody to the call today. We are very excited to have the folks from MD Anderson Cancer Center here to speak on our call today. The moderator for today's event will be Hani Shinar. I'll be mentioning him momentarily. But we do thank you for joining our webinar. I am the Oracle Marketing Manager at Perficient, and today's webinar is Cancer Center's Forward-Looking Rolling Forecast with Oracle Cloud and MD Anderson Cancer Center Success Story. Time permitting, we should be able to have a Q&A session at the end of today's event. We certainly are planning for that. So please make sure that if you have questions that arise throughout the event, go ahead and enter them into that audience chat window that you should see in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And feel free to do that at any time. So as questions arise, go ahead and jot your question down so that you don't forget it as the event progresses today. And two questions often come up with our online events. Can I get a copy of the slides and a link to the recording? And the answer to both of those questions is yes. We will email you with that information on how to access both the slides and the recording following today's event. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce today's speakers: Juan Castro, Vice President, Finance at MD Anderson Cancer Center; Hani Shinar, General Manager, Perficient's Oracle EPM Practice; and Nandini Nehru, Senior Solutions Architect at Perficient. Welcome, speakers, and Hani, take it away.
Thank you, Susan. First of all, I want to personally thank Juan for participating today. With the uncertainty around coronavirus, I really appreciate Juan taking time out of his busy schedule to speak with us about the work we have done at MD Anderson. So Juan's worked at MD Anderson for 20-plus years. Today, he's the VP of Finance, primarily responsible for financial planning and performance analysis of MD Anderson's operating budget. As the General Manager of the Oracle EPM practice at Perficient, I'm responsible for planning and execution of our Oracle EPM practice. I've been with Perficient going on 14 years, legacy domain expertise in the Hyperion platform with 20-plus years in the EPM space. Nandini Nehru has worked for Perficient for 10-plus years on various projects, performing analysis, design, development, configuration, and testing of the applications we deliver. She's been the lead architect for MD Anderson for many years. From an agenda perspective, just really high level, I'm going to just spend a couple minutes talking about who Perficient is and what our capabilities are around Oracle EPM. I'll turn it over to Nandini and Juan, who are going to go through the success story of the applications and the roadmap of the work we've done at MD Anderson. And then we'll have a quick little wrap up with why Oracle with the Q&A session thereafter. Perficient is a national system integrator focused on digital transformation. Our work enables the Global 2000 to improve productivity and competitiveness, grow and strengthen relationships with customers, suppliers, partners, and ultimately reduce costs with the work that we do. You'll see we have offices in 20-plus locations, offshore capabilities as well. So, our Oracle EPM practice is run and managed out of the Houston office. You'll see what we like to think of. Our offices are what we call the football city. So anywhere you see a major NFL football team, we tend to have an office there. We have 20-plus locations. We're always growing. We also have domestic and offshore delivery capabilities as well. Perficient is traded on the NASDAQ. We offer a level of comprehensiveness with long-term growth and sustainability. We have roughly 3,700 colleagues. Out of those 3,700, 3,000 are located in the U.S. Another 700 are in offshore capabilities. What I'm most proud about on this slide here is our repeat business rate. So roughly 90% of our revenue of that $565 million from 2019 can be tied back to repeat business with existing customers. And what that means to me is that we do a really good job for our customers, and they continue to bring us back in other capacities to do additional work for them. Our Oracle practice overview. Perficient is an Oracle Platinum partner. We offer multi-pillar support around ERP, EPM, and analytics capabilities. We are a cloud excellence implementer as well, so we jump through all the hoops that Oracle makes us jump through to maintain, the past certification exams and have customer references around different functional areas. And we have experience around various industries. CPM practice started back in 2002. We offer comprehensive capabilities around the life cycle of an implementation, from pre-implementation strategy to execution on the actual implementations themselves, training, as well as post-implementation support and managed services. We are a full life cycle practice. We are also an Oracle authorized education center, so we run the training for Oracle out of the Houston office. And with that being said, I'd like to pass it over to Juan and Nandini.
Thank you, Hanny. This is Juan Castro here with MD Anderson Cancer Center. Hanny gave a brief introduction in terms of what I do here. And just to elaborate on that, I manage and facilitate all the planning processes here at MD Anderson, from operating budgets to long-range plans to business plans, cost accounting, also position management, capital equipment. And we do this with a lot of task force and committees that are faculty-led, whether they're scientists or physicians. MD Anderson, in terms of size, we're about $5.5 billion in a budget, and just around a little over 22,000 employees. We are an academic medical center, and we are a state institution, so our reporting does get a little complicated with fund groups, sources of funds, whether they're practice plan dollars, philanthropy, patient income dollars, or auxiliary operations. So the success story around this is around trying to be more agile, focusing on planning best practices, being able to run scenarios, and do continuous planning. So MD Anderson, I mentioned we're a comprehensive cancer center focusing on patient care, prevention, and education. And we've been ranked #1 for a number of years in the U.S. News World Report reports that come out every year. A little bit about our planning cycle. We are year-round, and depends on the season and the time. We zoom in, zoom out. Regions budget on the top right, that is our state budget. We are in a fiscal year that starts in September and ends in August. So we do a lot of our high-level, long-range planning around the fall timeframe to prepare to when we submit our state budget, which is around the May timeframe. We do a lot of target setting at that time in the spring. Then in June, this is when we open up our Hyperion planning application, and we have about 400 planning users participate in the process, where they have targets at that level based on trends and based on assumptions going forward. And then that wraps up around July, early August. We finalize the budget, and then on the bottom left is our long-term capital plan. The upper left is our economic forecasting model. This is where we zoom out, and we are looking at more key drivers and KPIs and running assumptions, blend in business plans into the plan, and see what that return is going to be in terms of operating margins and change in revenue and change of expense. In the middle there is rolling forecast, and that is something that we started about 3 or 4 years ago, doing some legacy initial models in Excel, trying to become more agile, focusing on drivers, automating the forecast a lot where there's minimal inputs, and also minimal participation from budget users, primarily central finance, relying on the data, those key drivers, and then some core operations individuals, whether in the clinical operations or in our science operations, our research, to help us in feedback with those forecasts. Legacy system, this is where we started. This is just a screenshot, a little bit of an eye chart, but it just shows you some of the granularity. We used to have probably about 150 spreadsheets where we would maintain. It was very cumbersome. It was decentralized. It was very manual. When we wanted to change something, we had to go to a different number of cells, and just very high risk also for things breaking. And that's that last comment there. It just restricted by Excel a lot of data limitations also, and also the security. I mentioned version control. I think we had to do this just to understand what that level in terms of granularity we needed to be at in terms of capturing those drivers. Down to a cost center level is definitely not the way to go. You want to be more aggregate and understand where those drivers are. And so we did that over a few iterations going through the process. So it starts just like a lot of companies I understand use Excel. It's very powerful, an independent tool. But when you're trying to do this for a $5.5 billion operation, you need something that's a little bit more automated, more robust. We started a couple years ago with the first phase. We started a first application, Hyperion Planning. This was the not a cloud application. It was the on-premise application, and we did a rolling 18, and it was driver-based. Our first pass, we focused on some detailed KPIs, and we did go down to a level 0 department level, if you will. But it wasn't down to a cost center. A lot of departments had a number of cost centers. We went just down to a department level. And the key objective here is just following best practice where we wanted to eliminate the annual budgeting process, which at the time, it takes about 3 to 4 months, depending on the leadership that we have. It takes that much time to, when targets are distributed and you open up the system to have inputs on budgets, number of iterations, a number of consolidations that we would do. We used to call them budget battles back and forth. It was very time consuming. And because our fiscal year started in September, that's summertime. That's June, July, when people want to take their PTO and time away with their family. So it's a big interruption. So it was a big driver in trying to automate that as much as we could. But the application did help a little bit in terms of a first pass with good reporting capabilities and also consolidating the data. We went then to the cloud when we built our FY19 budgets, and we migrated 4 applications, on-premise applications, and we went enterprise-wide. We did that alignment, and it was more of a lift and shift strategy, where we took our existing models and we just moved them over into the cloud, and these are 4 that are really the annual budget operations, the budget, which is the first 2. Those are the names of the applications. Forecast, which is the 3rd bullet. We did move it over and transition it over, but we did not go live with it. And I think it was just the timing around that, and we were kicking off the budget process. It just wasn't a priority then to start releasing that with the end users. IT Proj, this is our information technology projects. Here at MD Anderson, we probably spend about $100 million plus on IT projects, whether they're capital or operating projects, and they're agile. They're quick. They're not starting every time at the beginning of the fiscal year. They could start mid-year, so we need an application to actually track and monitor those. And it did provide a good ease of use and scalability. The cloud solution did. And most importantly, just the features that it provided also, the cloud tool. Phase 3, this is just recent, very exciting move for us where the goal was to continue to eliminate or significantly reduce the annual budgeting process with going to rolling forecast, but also give us, and I say us, FP&A, financial plan analysis, a lot of the capabilities to work with the tool. So reduce the dependency on central IT with a lot of work behind the scenes with dimension maintenance, organization level changes. That was one of the big requirements that we had because we wanted to be agile. Here at MD Anderson, our structures do change, our drivers do change. So we didn't want to submit an IT service ticket for central IT to complete the work that had to be prioritized, and it could take maybe a week or 2 for completion. In central FP&A, my business partner, we wanted to do the work on our end. So what we're doing now is we are in production. We are running some models around this now, utilizing the tool. We did set drivers at various levels, not just at a department level. Some made sense at a division level. That's just a higher up level. We could have 7, 10 departments that roll up to a division, let's call it surgery, or cancer, or medical oncology, or pharmacy. And that's where it was a key driver. We get 90% information there in terms of accuracy, relationships, and we set the models there. So the flexibility was there, and more importantly, this is something that FP&A, my team, would manage going forward. Also, reporting, a lot of just out-of-the-box dashboards and reports we leveraged and used from Enterprise PBCS, that application. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nandini, who will go over some application design, some specifics in terms of the phase 3 work. Nandini?
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Juan, for taking us through the journey of where we are at today with MD Anderson. So like he mentioned, we started off with an Excel-based model, where we had like 150 templates that FP&A built and was maintaining it for a while and kind of discovering where it made sense to actually forecast at and what drivers to be used, what levels to be done. And then we went ahead and created the application on premise, which was for Hyperion 11.12.4 version. That was a very detailed level of forecast at the lowest level of departments. That was our forecast 1.0, essentially. Then it got migrated to cloud as part of our lift and shift strategy. And then finally, as the last phase, which was last year, actually, we built and redesigned the forecast 2.0 application. So my role in the webinar today is actually to go over the technical part of it as to how we designed the application so that it's robust, what are the different cubes in the application, dimensionality, and things like that. With that, let me first talk about the functional aspect of it, which is essentially the model that we kind of broken down into different sections in it. So we essentially divided our P&L, which is what we mostly focus on at in MD Anderson, is divided it into 3 different sections of revenue, personal expense, and non-personal expenses. Now, each of these P&L category had its own logic, but even within the different departments / divisions, we had some variances here and there on what drivers we wanted to use, and I'll give a few examples in future slides. But the second point to note here is that the entity hierarchy that we wanted to do forecast at was ragged. So essentially meaning we were not doing forecast all at level 0 of our entity hierarchy. At some divisions, we were doing it at the division level. Some places we wanted to do even higher at the SVP level. Now, for each of the accounts, we had some default calculations that were built. So some accounts were using 12-month actual trend forecast. Some situations like the depreciation account, we wanted to use a last close month value as a default calculation. And in some situations, we wanted to be able to use seasonality of last 12 months. So depending on the account, we decided what the default calculation logic should be. So as noted in the last 3 points on this slide, revenue dollars essentially was the activity times the price. Personnel expenses was essentially the FTE times salary per FTE. And then fringes was calculated based on a rate. Now, the rate needed to follow a seasonality in last 12 months of actuals. So that's how we calculated the rate. And then the non-personal expenses, we had divided it into further sections, and I'll cover that, but it was essentially a certain driver times either an FTE or times the revenue section of it. So we'll look at each of these sections in the next slide. So let's talk about revenue first. So revenue, essentially, we divided into 3 major sections. It was patient revenue, other revenue, and deductions. So patient revenue, which is essentially 90% of the revenue, was again divided into 3 different types of departments / divisions. First was the upstream. The upstream departments are departments which see the patients first coming in. And those activity was essentially based on something called new patients, which was a driver that we calculated and called it as productivity. So based on productivity, the activity of upstream departments was calculated. Productivity, we followed a trend function based on the last, and that was our calculation. And another thing that I want to mention here is that we, as part of our monthly actuals, once we load the monthly actuals, we actually calculate the entire forecast based on the default calculations, which are defined, kind of predefined. But then the users, essentially your FP&A people, can actually go in and update those default calculations / values to the new numbers. Based on whatever is best for future, they can update, let's say, a productivity for a department. They are seeing a growth in a specific department. They can increase the FTE that was calculated by the default calculation, and then the whole forecast gets recalculated based on those updated numbers. The second sort of category of departments here are the centers, or what we call midstream departments. And the activity or the number of patients coming in for those midstream departments are actually based on our upstream departments. Then lastly, our downstream departments are departments which are categorized as like labs, diagnostic imaging, path labs, redonc departments, which essentially get their business by referrals from upstream or midstream departments. So all of their activity is actually driven off by other departments. So most of the revenue here is based on relationships between the entity hierarchy. So those entity hierarchy relationships were defined within this application as well. Lastly, the deductions. These deductions are calculated based on a deduction rate. And that rate, we were using the last close month value as the default calculation. But again, the FP&A planners can actually go in. Once the whole forecast gets calculated, we leave it to the FP&A planners to go back and actually update the deduction rate. They could either use a trend function, they could use last close month value, they can right-click and select use average of 3 months. So some of the options are pre-built, and then of course they can manually go in and update those deduction rates as well. Would you like to add anything on this slide?
No, I think it's, and this did take a lot of input from working with operational areas in terms of their key drivers and how we should model it. Something that we do back test also to make sure if we need to adjust anything, we have the flexibility to do it. And that's the importance of this, is to also check the accuracy of the forecast and do comparisons also in case something does change, whether it's a relationship or some kind of driver.
Right. Yeah, I think going through these many iterations, so like having the Excel file and then doing Forecast 1.0 actually helped us kind of reach at this point where we kind of understand the relationships much better now. Okay, going to the next slide. So personnel expense, as I mentioned, so there are essentially 3 different aspects of personnel expenses that we calculate within the forecast model. The first one and the most important one being the FTEs. So the FTEs, we had 4 different job code categories that we calculate it at. So we have the faculty FTEs, we have the APPs, which is your advanced practitioners. Then we have the classified and the education FTEs. Faculty FTEs, we take it as part of our base level input. Essentially what that means is that we first let it calculate based on last close month value, but then it's kind of the first input that FP&A have to see their position management system to see what are the new open upcoming faculty positions, and they kind of update it on a monthly basis. So that's one maintenance that they have to do. But other than that, all other FTEs are calculated based on either the faculty FTEs or a ratio that has been provided. In our Forecast 1.0 application, we actually had job code as a different dimension, but we noticed that it was causing some performance issues. So actually in this Forecast 2.0, because there are only 4 job code categories that we need to forecast our application on, we were able to remove that dimension altogether. And instead of using a separate dimension, we actually added 4 different accounts, like faculty FTE is one account, and then APP FTE is another account, education FTE, admin FTE, and then classified FTE. So we were able to create them as accounts itself. It actually helped in performance really a lot. So like I mentioned, so FTE is our input. Based on the FTEs, we are able to calculate our salary dollars, which is essentially our rate times FTE, each of the job code categories. And then we can calculate our fringe benefits based on a fringe rate times salary dollars. So we were able to reduce our accounts dimensionality, and then we were able to build those dimensions within our account structure. And I'll cover the dimensionality aspect also in our technical design. I'll cover that in the next few slides.
And then if I can add something to the FTs.
Yes, please.
I mentioned MD Anderson, we're an academic medical center, an AMC, and what that means is that we have different fund groups, different sources of funds, and they work like different businesses. So our practice plan or our hospital fund groups, there's a lot of drivers on the FTs in terms of clinical FTs. But if we're working on a different fund group, maybe philanthropy dollars, it's a different business where those are maybe funding projects where we have a spending plan that are going to be spending. So the FTs are driven differently. The other thing is within the FTs, there's another drill down or a category in terms of, is it a patient care FT? Is it an IT? Is it overhead? Is it a research? Which is another dimension around that where we can add more driver information that would help with position review and prioritization of our labor management. So that is something that I think in the future we're looking into where we can actually classify that to help with making decisions in terms of working with our recruiters in hiring those FTs, and it will help us model better. So we, for example, we're going through it right now with looking at essential positions in facilities, housekeepers. We don't want to slow down housekeepers because they have a relationship with patient care or hospital. Same with our coders that work in finance, that we need those coders to help with the patient care, the revenue cycle. So more granularity on the FTs than we have on the reporting side, but we're seeing potentially that could be a driver going forward for us. And with healthcare, it's 65% of the cost structure is people. So it's important to understand the FTs and what's causing the increase or decrease on that going forward.
So I do have a slide where I'll show you how we were able to include that as part of our accounts, and then also the breakdown, like Juan is mentioning, of the classified FTEs into patient care and other classified FTEs as well. Okay, so non-personal expense, we broke it down into essentially just 3 different categories versus in Forecast 1.0, we had actually a lot more categories. As part of the analysis during these phases, we discovered that essentially we can just look at other M&O instead of breaking it down into travel and purchase services and things like that, and just forecast at that higher level made sense. So we were able to bring it 1 level up and actually use a driver called other M&O per FTE, where the ratio actually follows a 12-month trend, which is the default calculation. We put that as a forecasted value, and based on the FTE calculated, we are able to calculate other M&O for the forecast months. The other 2 categories of non-personal expenses that were kind of important to forecast at was the medical and drug supplies. Again, the driver that we used was per hospital GPR, follows a 12-month trend function, and then we calculate the forecast based on the hospital GPRs. And lastly, the depreciation expense, it's basically just the last close month, which is the default calculation. But again, FP&A can go back and update the numbers that are calculated here. One other thing I do want to mention is so we have created all these default calculations, but we also had to create situations where the default calculations don't work. So there were a lot of sort of catch-all situations where, okay, if this default calculation does not work, then what should we do? What should the system do? So as part of our calculations, we are doing sort of error catching, error handling, which essentially if a default calculation, for example, a 12-month trend is not resulting in any answer, we do use like a last close month value or an average of 12 months value. Okay. So this is essentially how our application looks like. There are essentially 2 BSO cubes within our forecast application. Forecast level 0, FCST_L0 cube, and then FCST_RF cube. So FCST_L0 cube, which is our level 0 cube, actually has 7 dimensions, and we've been able to keep it at that basically by removing our job code dimension and our procedure categories dimension. We really just are using accounts, entity, fund group, period, scenario, version, and years dimension. Difference between the RF application or RF cube and the level 0 cube is in the entity dimension. In our level 0 cube, the entity dimension is basically our entire department hierarchy, including the level 0 departments. The RF cube only has the level which is important or which is required for forecasting piece. So essentially what that means is if there is a division or SVP level where we don't want to go down to the department level, we just pull the data up till that SVP or division level in our RF cube. This design actually helped us do is we don't have to go back to our database or our warehouse to pull in any actuals. So let's say if tomorrow we decide that we want to do a more detailed level forecast for a specific division, then all we need to do is basically re-push the data from level 0 cube to RF cube. So data is already sitting in our level 0 cube for all the departments and all the divisions and all of the SCP levels. And if tomorrow the level of forecast that we need to do changes, all we need to do is essentially change the level in the cube and push the data again. So when I say push, technically that means the data maps that we've already built. So this allows for the flexibility actually with the FP&A team, where all they need to do is make sure those levels are available in the RF cube, and then they just run the push. So this is kind of one of the major requirements from Juan and his team, that they should be able to manage and maintain this application within FP&A as much as possible. So this was one way to kind of solve that requirement. Also, we were able to enable the predictive planning in our RF cube. So all of the calculations, reporting are actually being run on the RF cube itself. And the flexibility is within the MD Anderson team to change the level of forecast. Let's take a look at the application or the dimension design. So on this screenshot, as you can see, we talked about 7 dimensions, with the forecast mainly being around our entity dimension. The way we were able to remove the job code as a dimension was, you can see on the screen, this is our accounts dimension, and I have expanded our total FTE. So originally we had the CLASP that you see is the classified job code. We had it as a separate dimension. So we just brought that specific member within the total FTE hierarchy, and that way we are able to combine our job code into the accounts dimension itself. And like Juan was mentioning, we actually break it down further below. So we have total patient care classified. We also have research classified, and then other classified. And similarly, the admin FTEs are also broken down into these 3 categories. And then you have the EDUSP, which is education FTE job code category, and then finally faculty FTE job code category. So essentially, we divided our accounts dimension to take care of the entire statement of ops, which is where you'll see your dollar amounts. But then we have our forecast metrics, where you can see the FTEs broken down to the job code level detail. Then we have other parameters like the revenue quantity, the charge per unit, and the other sort of our drivers. All of that is built within the accounts dimension, thus reducing the need for any other dimension other than the fund group, which is the only other sort of custom dimension that we are using. And the second sort of unique feature was that we were able to add was the right-click menu option. So on all the forms, regardless of if you're doing revenue personnel expense or non-personal expense, we have this right-click option available. For any account, they can actually, once the default calculation runs, if they don't like the numbers that were generated from the default calculation, FP&A users can go back and essentially change using a 3-month trend function, a 6-month trend function, 12-month trend function, or the averages of 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. So these are the options that we kind of worked with FP&A to make sure we at least build these rules that you can run on any account, and it will recalculate the forecast values based on these calculations. Other than that, there is obviously the predictive planning, which is a feature that is available with the cloud, Planning Cloud. That is also available. And then, of course, you have your manual submit and updating of the numbers. Right. Anything, Juan or Hani, you would like to add on this one?
I think you touched it very well. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So formula for success, I think from Perficient standpoint, obviously having a long history with the customer and having the knowledge of OAC, EPBCS, healthcare within the team actually helped with the project. We obviously knew what the customer wanted in terms of the dynamic design and flexibility, being able to have the control within the FP&A department. Those kind of things were key in building the application. And then obviously adaptability to the changing needs and requirements. So even during the project, we had a reorg happen several times in the entity dimension. So to be able to take that and run that with that quickly was helpful and actually helped with the project as well. Juan, would you like to, or Hani, would you like to add something?
Sure. I can talk about a couple things. So really first, I think most importantly is let's talk about some of the successes we had on the project. And then we can talk about how we got there to get to that success. You know, it's been estimated, and I know we're still trying to crunch these numbers, but roughly 35 to 40% time reduction in time to complete that forecast. And so trimming off a few days on that process across the processes saved a lot of time for the folks to be able to kind of analyze those numbers rather than kind of inputting that. We were able to deploy the forecast at varying levels of detail. So the various departments across the system were able to choose the level of detail they needed to forecast at. You know, one of the big things is FP&A now has the ability to manage and own the application. So they're able to handle all the changes and the updates and the functions they need in the application. And then improve performance, just stripping out one of the dimensions that Nandini talked about. Using the cloud as an application has also improved performance. And then really most importantly, on time and on budget, right? That's typically what we aim for all of our projects, and we're able to deliver that. Now, the way we got there is from an Oracle perspective, leveraging the cloud, taking out all the hardware components and the backups and the things that come with managing an environment in-house. Taking that off of the plate was a huge success. And so the time to maintain the application is just application level. No more major upgrades that have to be done. Upgrades are painful, right? It's installing, migrating, regression testing, data tie-outs. They're painful, and that with the cloud being able to, on a monthly basis, new features and new functionalities, we're able to build in some time to test some of those pieces out. Another big thing is in the legacy application, we had the forecast app, and we were feeding data over into a BI application to do executive level dashboards. That's actually built into the application now. And so the ability to see in real time, the dashboard changes as data is updating in the application gave visibility to the management team at MD Anderson. From a user perspective, the adoption was really, really easy, right? It's the next gen interface, the mobility capabilities made the user adoption really easy for the application. And then, of course, the predictive planning, being able to run predictions and seeing kind of how they tied back. From a Perficient perspective, we've got a long history with MD Anderson. Goes back many, many years. We've done work in the BI space, on the planning space, the migration to EPBCS. We have a healthcare industry vertical that has been involved as well. But, really a lot of the work is the work that Nandini did out there, building that dynamic design to make it a useful application. And then, from a pre-project perspective, from a change management, so Juan and his team did enough of the legwork up front to get finance and FPA buy-in, right? And then around design, we looked at data forms and tried to get them to match those Excel templates, those 150 so templates that they've been used to, is making them as close as possible to those. And then the flexibility around the applications, control with the FPA, and of course, is kind of what led to the successful project. But Nandini, Juan, if there's anything you guys want to add there?
The only thing I'll add to it from an MD Anderson perspective and why this was a success, I think it's important for any of these major enterprise projects, is if you don't have executive buy-in, if you don't have the mindset, the direction that, yes, we want to start to significantly reduce the burden of creating a 12-month fixed budget where, the first month you become obsolete, and just see what's happening right now in terms of business conditions, what's happening, whether it's a hurricane or an economic or a virus, you need to be agile to that. And just the amount of time that it saves where you can just focus more on improving processes, your decision support tools, your analytics, your dashboards, moving more towards these things that are out there now in terms of the artificial intelligence, machine learning, RPA, that you need to get that executive buy-in. So it's a journey. It takes time. There's a lot of literature around that, and I'm seeing more in healthcare, seeing more of a movement where we are reducing that more and more time. This past fiscal year, building our 20 budget, we completed our $5.5 billion operating budget in weeks. 8 weeks. That's all it took. And I think it's because having those division chairs and executives, faculty leaders, administrators, they believe that time can be used. There's better value in our time than going back and forth iterations and working on numbers. So the technology is there, and the partner working with Perficient, as Hanny said, and Nandini, they're patient with us. We go back and forth. The forecasting, there's not one model. Here it is. You have to know your drivers and the level of granularity and how far you want to forecast. I think best practice is an 18-month lookout. But I think it just starts going back to that executive support from a major enterprise initiative like this. So the next slide, what's next in terms of us is now testing this a little bit more, outline business process to match our forecast 2.0. So working with operations and sharing with them, this is what the system is projecting based on the assumptions, the drivers that are in the system. Tell us how it deviates from your model. So we don't release the applications for departments and divisions to input numbers in. We expose the numbers to them, share it with them so they can see it in the application, and then we would have periodic meetings to discuss major deviations of the forecast. But we're in a cadence where every month we can adjust the forecast going forward. And also taking advantage, I think we're just scratching the surface in terms of our reporting capabilities and the visualization, and looking more into the Oracle Analytics Cloud platform in terms of that solution. So I think I envision less charts and tables. I think there's going to be more graphical representation using OAKS. And again, bullet 3, I spoke about that. That continues. And then also we haven't really looked closely into the capital module and the projects. So that's something that it is on the list to maybe look at potentially in the fall of FY21 when our next fiscal year starts. And then also this is more on looking at the account reconciliation, the cloud to manage direct process. This is where my peer, our controller, Mike Kinneker, is looking into as well, that there's a lot of advantages we can do there, looking into some efficiency in terms of account reconciliation. I'll turn it over to Hanny who can speak to you more on the Oracle Cloud.
Sure. Thanks, Juan. And so one of the things that we're doing as a practice is we're offering a speed to value, really innovate with Oracle Cloud. And so what that is there's a lot of our customers out there that are having conversations around what do? I'm running a legacy Hyperion application. Do I go to the cloud? Do I go to version 11.2? So we're offering at really essentially no cost having our experts like Nandini and like folks on my team that are able to come out and spend some time with our customers looking in, and it's an interactive workshop where we're going to dive into the applications, look at the landscape, look at your processes, look at pain points, gaps, and help talk about, well, what does the roadmap look like? Do I go to Hyperion 11.2? Do I move to the cloud? What are some of the new and discontinued features, and help you with that, really what the next steps are. And that's something that we're offering and that we're more than happy to have conversations around. And with that being said, we are going to open up the call to questions that come in via chat during today's event. If you have any questions, if you haven't had a chance to ask yet, please type them into the chat box at this time. And so there are a couple questions that I've seen. So starting out, how many chart of accounts do you have?
So I know when we went to our first ERP back in 2013, we went to PeopleSoft, we significantly reduced our, and I'm assuming this is natural chart of accounts, so all of the expenses and revenue, and I think we're under 2,000 is the number that we have. And now, of course, we don't forecast and budget at the 2,000. We would roll things up. A good example is like travel, because we're a state institution, there are multiple natural accounts under travel. We budget forecast at a travel account, if you will. But I believe the number is around 2,000.
What was the planner's feedback with respect to the newly improved forecast?
So from FP&A perspective, we would run comparison models, and there's about 6 of us here that review, and they've been assigned to different areas, mission areas, whether clinical or research or overhead administrative areas. And what they're seeing is, based on their internal models that they would work on, primary in Excel, and comparing it against to what the system is calculating and displaying, they're very pleased in terms of especially just the time saving, and Annie spoke about that. When you see the accuracy there, and you're seeing the system do the calculation based on the drivers, and you're not doing any manual inputs, judgmental call, multiple Excel cells and inputting numbers, programming, establishing relationships, that is key. So we focus more on assumptions. That's the planners now have to focus on who are we hiring in terms of these service lines, area. Business plan is being approved, implemented, things like that, and they would focus more on the outlook. But they can also keep in mind looking at the drivers if they need to change anything. So it's been favorable. The next step now is to push it out to the agents, and so they can look at their forecasts, major deviations. But so what we're seeing, there's not much difference, and it's actually getting a little bit more accurate in some of the areas.
Is there a reason for creating 2 separate BSO applications, one level 0 and one top level, and pushing data between them instead of having one unified hierarchy?
Yeah, I can take that one. So essentially, we are loading actuals at the lowest level of department. The reason for doing that was because the forecast, the level at which they wanted to do forecasts could change. And we did not want to impact our sort of sequels or whatever to go back to change our, level of actuals that we are loading to, because that would mean we'll have to go and talk to IT. Hey, now we don't want to do at level 0 for this department. Can you just aggregate that data up and just push, so much data? So that was the reason that we did want to bring all the data at the lowest level in our sort of level 0 cube, or if you want to call it just the actuals cube. The second cube, which is really our forecast cube, which is at the level that they want to do forecast, we did not want to bring the lowest level departments, because then when you're inputting your forecast numbers, then you'll have to select sort of the right department where you want to forecast. And also in terms of running the calculations and things like that, it would just add a lot of overhead. So we wanted to make sure we give them the flexibility where they can change the level at which they want to do forecasts without having to go back to IT, but then also make sure in terms of user interface and how you input the data, it still looks clean and they only see the data and reports at the level at which they are forecasting.
Thanks, Nandini. What mechanism are you using to transfer data between level 0 and the forecast cubes?
So we are using 2 different methods depending on So there is a difference in terms of fund groups also. Fund group is another custom dimension. So for their hard funds, they actually forecast at the lowest level department. But for soft funds, they are actually doing it at a higher level. So when we had to move the data between the 2 cubes, if it was like no transformation required, we were using data maps, which are available. And for soft funds, where we actually wanted to make sure, even though we are pulling the data at the lowest level, it actually just goes to the highest level. There is some mapping required, essentially. We are using data management load rules.
I think this one's for Juan. So when moving from on-prem to cloud, did MD Anderson look at any other cloud solutions, and how did you narrow down to select Oracle Cloud?
So that's a good question. So, we've been an Oracle client, and we've used their products going back to maybe 2001, I remember, and we've gone through the upgrades, and we've done the software has always performed for us, very scalable, responsive, very quick. We have an internal team that works very well with it in terms of people that know S-Space and also the planning tool. So it was a natural transition for us on and just seeing the capabilities, the features, and hearing success stories in terms of what Oracle did in the cloud. They're mature in terms of their applications. So we did do some initial review of it, but it just seemed like a natural progression, just continue on with Oracle.
Okay. There's a question, what features are discontinued in 11.2 and are they available in EPM Cloud? There are lots of things that are discontinued in 11.2. I think most importantly is EPMA has gone away, and with that, a lot of the pre-built applications, CapEx, workforce, projects, public sector, those have all gone away in 11.2. A lot of those are available. You look at with the cloud, with the comprehensive suite that you get, you have a metadata management tool now. You also get the pre-built with workforce and capital and strategic modeling and other things. But there are, I mean, we can certainly, if you'd like to have a sidebar conversations to go over that detail, we're more than happy to do that. So how frequently is maintenance required, and what is downtime for patching and maintenance?
You mean from the technical maintenance? I mean, that's part of the Oracle Cloud services. So, yeah. So from technical maintenance, it's, yeah, sure. It's every night, and it just takes a backup of the entire application. It does not take more than 20, 30 minutes. I'll have to go back and check the time, but it's part of the Oracle Cloud environment. We really are not doing anything other than that. We just download that snapshot on our servers and just keep like for last 30 days or something like that backup. As far as the application maintenance in terms of like dimensionality and whatnot, the only dimension that really needs maintenance is the entity dimension, which is part of the actuals process that we close every month, we kind of go back and look at the entity dimension, and if we do have DRM at MD Anderson, so they actually manage that through DRM. It's been their process for almost, I guess, 7 years, for as long as I've been with them. They've always had that, and we use that for maintaining our application hierarchies. But that's all the maintenance that they're needing to do.
So here's one for Juan. How has this implementation helped you to manage bad debt reserves?
I was looking at that. I'm assuming that's tied to our allowances or our deductions, if you will. And we haven't built a model around that specifically in terms of deductions with all of our payers. Separate models for that we use. But in terms of just return on investment, the tool has given us time saving and it's in our time valuable areas. It's tremendous in terms of the application, the process, and because it's not just the software, I think it's the process too, where we are significantly enhancing the building the budget process, for example. Highlight certain areas in terms of where we can reduce costs or improve on productivity in certain areas, primarily on the side. So that's where it's helped. But I'm assuming that's tied to traffic that we don't have a clarity model for the application today. That is definitely something on the list that we can.
Okay, and so can you discuss the types of dashboards that have been successful for reporting?
The ones I've seen, and none you can touch on a few others, are the biggest is looking at KPIs, trends on KPIs, and looking at historical and always comparing to the recent forecast. And we can store historical forecast as well. And then looking, always refreshing that when the books close going forward. This also helps with the process where we want to actually, the goal is to recast, push out another forecast 3 or 4 days after the books close. That is our goal. Right now, it's probably taken us a good week, which I still think that's pretty good. But we want to definitely be prepared and look at the trends and then put all the assumptions in. When we close, let's say March business, we're ready to go in less than a week in terms of polishing out. KPIs are important. Of course, the income statement, so you can quantify the dollars, revenue, and expense. But also, so a lot of it is tabular. I mentioned earlier in terms of we want to get more into more graphics and charts and graphs. But and showing the drivers too is important. So we have some good reports in terms of drivers and relationships. And when I say KPIs, it's patient, we're in hospital, so patient visits, surgery cases, billed procedures on the diagnostic imaging, things like that, and also full-time equivalents, or FTs, looking at that information. And also just probably comparing your scoring yourself, how did you do in your forecast, or how accurate were you, right? So we want to definitely enhance some of those going forward and leveraging OAKS.
Thanks, Juan. It looks like we're nearing the top of the hour, so I'm going to pass the mic back over to Susan Welton.
Thanks, Hanny. So as Hanny mentioned, we have reached the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and close the Q&A portion of today's event at this time. But if you submitted a question and we were unable to get to your question, we will follow up with you shortly after today's event. I just want to also encourage you to follow Perficient online. We have some great blog content out there. If you haven't yet discovered the Perficient Oracle blog, I recommend you check it out. It's certainly worth your time to go ahead and see the tremendous content that our subject matter experts are contributing weekly to keep you informed and for them to share their expertise with you. And as a reminder, we will be emailing the link to today's event for the on-demand recording, and we will be sending a link to the slide portion of today's event as well so that you can review it yourself at your leisure or share that with others. So at this time, I want to thank all of the presenters on today's call, but especially to Juan. We know that this is a particularly trying time for you, that you are very busy, and we truly appreciate how gracious you are with your time, that you were able to go ahead and still commit to today's webinar. So with that, I'm going to close today's event, and thank you to everyone, and we hope to see you online in the future.
Thank you.